health and resilience of this industry is only as healthy and resilient as the farming communities or the wild harvesting communities. And so how can formulation happen in a way that enhances that?
Hello and welcome to the Herbs with Rosalee podcast, a show exploring how herbs heal as medicine, as food, and through nature connection. I'm your host, Rosalee de la Forêt. I created this YouTube channel to share trusted herbal wisdom so that you can get the best results when relying on herbs for your health. I love offering up practical knowledge to help you dive deeper into the world of medicinal plants and seasonal living. Each episode of the Herbs with Rosalee podcast is shared on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast app. Transcripts and recipes for each episode can be found at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com or through the link in the video description. Also in the video description, you'll find other helpful resources. For example, to get my best herbal tips, as well as fun bonuses, be sure to sign up for my weekly herbal newsletter. Okay, grab your cup of tea and let's dive in. I've had the privilege of knowing Ann and her incredible work for over a decade, and I'm continually inspired by the way she contributes to the herbal community. I'm thrilled to welcome her back on the show to talk about the second release of her must-read book, which explores the origins of the herbs that we use. In this conversation, Ann highlights essential questions to consider before purchasing herbs, offering valuable insights for anyone who values thoughtful and sustainable herbal practices. For those of you who don't already know her, Ann Armbrecht, PhD, is an anthropologist and the director of the Sustainable Herbs Initiative. She's also the author of Following the Herbal Harvest, a search for the healing promise of plant medicines, which was previously published under the title The Business of Botanicals, exploring the healing promise of plant medicines in a global industry. In this work, she documents her journey of tracing herbs from seed to shelf. Ann is also the co-producer of the documentary Newman, The Healing Power of Plants, and the author of the award-winning ethnographic memoir Thin Places, A Pilgrimage Home, based on her research in Nepal. In 2017, she was a Fulbright Nehru Scholar, studying the supply chain of medicinal plants in India. These days, Ann lives with her family in central Vermont. Ann, I'm so thrilled to have you back on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be back and speaking with you.
Likewise. So I'm not shy about it. I tell everybody that if you're an herbalist, this is a must-have book. I think everybody who calls themselves an herbalist, anyone who buys herbs, anyone who thinks about buying herbs, definitely needs your book. And one reason why we're here is because your book is looking very different these days. So it's got a new cover, new title, a beautiful title, Following the Herbal Harvest, a search for the healing promise of plant medicines. And so my first question for you, Ann, is why the cover change?
Well, first, thank you always for the kind words you say about my book and my work. So the first title was The Business of Botanicals, and it had this very kind of trade show cover before with kind of a field and supplements, and it looked like every trade show publication. And the book isn't about the business of botanicals. It is about what the title is now, following the herbs. That was actually what I wanted, Following the Herbs, but they picked Following the Herbal Harvest. And it's because it's a journey to, when I started, I wanted to find out, okay, can the intention that herbalists talk about that's so important in herbal medicine, can it show up in herbs that are sourced in global supply networks? And the book is about my trying to follow that thread into the different places that I went, and sharing what I learned and asking the questions that I asked. And so I feel like it captures more of that exploration rather than a definitive guide on the business of herbs.
Yeah, I could see all of that. Yeah, and the new title is so beautiful, and it's a wonderful invitation to follow that harvest. And it's something that a lot of us as herbalists know is so important to know the source of our plants. Sometimes I think we can get sloppy on that, in that sometimes we harvest our own plants and we can feel good about that. sometimes we know directly who we were sourcing the plants from. But in this day and age, it's really easy to buy herbs and have no idea where they originated or what their journey was like to get to us. And that's what I feel like you do in this book is you actually follow that harvest and you pull back the curtains and show us what's in there. And the thing that continually surprises me all throughout this book is one, well, first of all, I just want to say it's such a fun read because it's like a travel log. And so you get to go on an adventure too. And that's a really fun aspect of the book. But the thing that's very surprising is that there's no easy answers. I think we could see this book and think, oh, I bet Anne's going to tell us to buy local and buy organic. And I don't know that you would disagree with that, but that's not really where you end up in this book. And so, yeah, there's just so much complexity and nuance, which is why I think it's a must read to understand just the complexities in there. Yeah, I wonder just along that line, what's something that surprised you along the way?
Maybe that there were no easy answers. And I think that nobody had those answers. I kept thinking that someone was doing it all right, one, and that someone had done the work that I was trying to do before me, and they'd already figured it out. And so that it's a process. And that's actually, so the excerpt that I want to share with you is about the first chapter, and it's talking about my own journey learning to make the first tincture I made, and how simple the process was, and how, though, that process is so much of, to me, the power of herbal medicine. And so for me, the process of this journey of following herbs has been the medicine that they've offered. And it connects with what you were saying around so I guess that surprises me, to answer that question, that I didn't, and I'm still on that journey. I mean, the work that I'm doing at the Sustainable Herbs Initiative is continuing the questions that I'm asking and exploring in the book, and engaging with people who are, working for all the companies that the herb community knows and loves, who are grappling with these questions day to day, and how challenging it is, and how they don't have the answers, but they know the questions to ask. And the things also maybe that matter are less bioorganic and more, although I would say bioorganic, and more that the relationships matter. And so, which is also what we're taught as an herbalist, right? That your relationship with the plant is part of the healing power of that plant. And that's what drew me to herbalism in the first place, the way Rosemary Gladstar taught about the relationship with plants as with some living entity, the aliveness of the world, and a sense of reciprocity rather than extraction. And the ideas that Robin Kimmerer has made so much more widespread now around the quality of being, just moving with respect, not treating plants as an object for our own consumption, and things like that. Things that for me were awakened in my work in Nepal. And then I found in herbal medicine. And then I found, actually, for a lot of people, herbal medicine was like a product on a shelf, and was not this relationship with a living entity. And that was the journey that led me to see, okay, can that relationship show up in global supply chains and global supply networks, where container loads of herbs are being shipped around the world? And to get back to the point about the context, where herbs matter, where herbs come from matters. It matters for the quality, matters for the impact on the earth, but it also directly matters because how the soil that plant is grown in is directly going to connect with the presence or absence of the constituents that you want, the vibrancy and vitality of the plant, whether there's pollutants in the air, what is in the soil, the water. There's organic chamomile from Egypt, but the Nile is one of the most polluted rivers in the world, and that's the source of the irrigation water for the chamomile. And then it's the quality of attention of the people doing the work that translates into, so if I'm in charge, this was a company in Poland where they got a lot of wild harvested herbs, and that the person who's getting those sacks of herbs, he's checking them. So, these sacks and sacks of herbs that, maybe they're all nettles, but maybe there's some other things mixed in because someone didn't really pay attention. And so that the person checking those sacks needs to know what to look for. And so are they being cared for and respected and well paid enough so that they care about their job, so that they're going to pay attention? So it's all these ways that the context matters in whatever that herb that we actually buy on the shelf, what goes into it. Anyway, that was a big circular way of
Oh, that was beautiful. And it made me think of like when we open up an herbal package of a plant that we've bought, and I think it's easy for us to make assumptions, especially if it does say it's organic, for example. We can make assumptions about what's in that bag. But you've just highlighted all of these like assumptions that we might be making that are not true. Like how, maybe the farm is certified organic, but the water they use to irrigate is polluted, or like you said, that maybe there's other materials get thrown in there, or something that you talk about in the book is just even like the processing along the way. Are these being stored on like cement floors where there's rats, for example? Like something, like there's all these considerations that we don't necessarily think about when we open up that bag of herbs. And so there's these hidden stories, and they're not all horror stories by any means. That you have beautiful stories in there, so it's not a horror story book. But there's all these things that we want to, these hidden stories that we can do a lot to find out about the herbs and where they come from. So with that in mind, somebody wants to buy some herbs. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Before, I just wanted to follow up on that, and this connects with the part about organic, but I think it's so the bigger frame of the work that I do and think about is the whole framework of ecological medicine, that we can't be well until the planet is well. And so when we were interviewing for Newman, Kevin Casey from Banyan Botanicals, and he was talking about non-point contamination, which is like there's a big challenge in the world right now of sourcing wild harvested organic herbs, not because they're harvested in areas that have chemicals sprayed, but because there's just chemicals in the air and pesticide drift and things like that. And Kevin said, it's not the organic herb industry's fault that there's non-point contamination. It's that the planet is polluted. And so I think the herb industry and herbalists who are part of that by buying herbs, if it's about wellness, it's not just our wellness, it's about how our choices impact the wellness of the planet and the people that are doing the work along the way to bring those herbs to us. And last year, I led a learning journey, a group of individuals from companies to Appalachia to explore the issues in the herbal products industry right now. And we had a roundtable discussion with wild harvesters in Southwest Virginia. And I felt, we were talking about pricing and the low prices that go to wild harvesting and the hard work and the challenges. And it was this open, honest opportunity for wild harvesters to speak to like traders and brands and things like that. But I felt like something we weren't touching on, a key issue. And an herbalist from Bristol, Virginia, Lori Briscoe, spoke up, and she said, this region has been exploited by the timber industry. It's been exploited then by the coal industry, and then by the opiate, the pharmaceutical industry. And she said, we want to believe that the herbal products industry is here to help, but it would be sick and twisted if in providing herbs that go to help other people be well, these people don't become well. And I feel like it's this shift from my wellness to how, by taking care of my wellness, I can also help produce more wellness in whatever products I'm buying and the worlds I can impact through my purchases.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think you're hitting on, like, when we talk about how herbalism can save the world, it's not necessarily like the cayenne on our knee that then helps with our arthritis, although that's like a beautiful thing. But it's what you're talking about. Like if we're talking about the global impact, this is what we're talking about. It's because it's giving us a new, or not a new really, but a way we can remember to act ecologically, to act with community in mind, and not simply act kind of with our blinders on in an individual way. And so there's a culture of reciprocity and respect that you've been mentioning that really comes along with it. And I think such an important part of herbalism, that herbalism, if we just make it about jars of herbs on the shelves, then we're missing out on really kind of the true power of herbalism and the potential to be transformative in a world that really needs it right now.
Yeah, you said that so well.
Yeah, thank you so much. You said it so well, Anne. Thank you. So let's talk about that specifically. Somebody, they want to buy herbs, but maybe they're at a store, maybe they're buying something online, maybe they're at a farmer's market, wherever, they want to exchange money for herbs. Let's talk about questions that they might want to ask in regards to that, to make a responsible globally health promoting decision about what herbs to buy.
Yeah, and there was somebody who wrote a blog post a while ago around why I didn't want to recommend companies. And I will come up with questions, but even questions, it's hard to think of the questions to ask. And I think it depends on who, of course. Like if it's a farmer's market, then that's one thing, because if the person that you're speaking with, oh, well, I guess not inevitably. I was assuming they would be growing the herbs themselves, but not necessarily. So, but if you can have a conversation, it's where are the herbs from? And what do you know about where the herbs are from? And what does the person you bought them know about what the herbs are from? Because I was quite surprised that the largest ingredient supplier in the world, it's a German company, it has a certification that they're always talking about. It's an internal certification. But then I found out only like 45 to 50% of their herbs are under that certification. And a lot of the rest are bought on the open market. And so a lot of companies know where some of their herbs are from. They only, I don't know if any know where all of their herbs are from, because it's really hard to know that. And so that's the first question. What do you know about where the herbs are from? And then how transparent they are in the answer. Because if they say, like once I wrote companies and asked where their black cohosh was from, and they said, oh, it's cultivated, and like 97% of black cohosh is wild harvested. And so I said, oh, I wrote and asked them that, and then they stopped answering my questions.
Mm-hmm.
That question.
I have some questions about that, Anne.
Yeah.
Because you talked about like open market, and people might not know, like what is it like? What is the open market? What does a company do when they buy herbs on the open market?
So often, and this is also when it gets so confusing, often there's a whole bunch of actors in supply chain is a horrible word, but in this, just for purpose right now, so say the supply chain. So if a farmer, there could be smallholder farmers in South India, say, growing turmeric, and they sell their turmeric to the local mandi, the sort of auction. And then so that person will aggregate a bunch for 10, 150 different farmers and their turmeric. They mix that all together, and then someone will come to buy that turmeric. They'll buy a certain amount of that turmeric, but there's no trace from the smallholder farms to the next level, and then that might go to an extract company, which would extract the curcuminoids or whatever it's being used. That's often for turmeric right now. And then it could go to, so that could be one for an extract, or if it were, say, coming to a US company, often there's contract manufacturers who are doing the tincture making or the extracts if it's capsules or something. And a company, a brand that we know and we see their face on the shelf, they may or may not have a say in the herbs that are purchased and in picking, say, I want it from this company or not. And their ability to have that purchasing influence depends on their size, on their and the quantity that they're buying and things like that, the price they're willing to pay. And but basically, so on the open market, it means it goes from small and it's mixed together and then mixed together and mixed together. And testing, happens at these levels, but I wrote it in the book. It's like a square amount from, like, I don't know, a room full of bags, you take this much or something, and you test it. And then if something shows up hot, then you have to go back and maybe do additional testing. But there's a lot of room for mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And then something like an organic, a certified supply chain, there has to be a paper trail. And so that is one of the questions. So to also ask, so where the herbs are from and what certifications do you have? Because certified organic is a way both of doing what you were saying before, sort of caring for the ecological context of the world, but it's also ensuring that there is some traceability. It also, if a company is going to go to the added time and work of investing in organic, there's a better chance that they're paying attention to things that you want them to be paying attention to ensure it's that the product you're getting is actually what it says on the label.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting in the book because you do say, there, maybe you don't say this, but there is some disillusionment with an organic certification. Like, we know that there's lots of wiggle room in there and it's not perfect, but that's what you say. It's not perfect, but it's what we have and it gives us something to work with. And I thought that was an interesting, and just, bringing up all those points, I thought was really a fascinating thing. It made me a little less disillusioned with organic and just accepting, like, this is the best we've got in terms of this and it's better than nothing. Because I don't know, you see an herb product on the shelf, and before reading your book, I just had this assumption that the herb company went to an herb farmer and bought the herbs from the farmer and then made their product. But sometimes these herbs can exchange hands 10, 12 times, right? I think that's the number in the book or something like that. So that's, like, just astounding. And like you said, it's been conglomerated, aggregated, and there's no way to know, in the end, like, where those actually came from. And then all the things you don't know about that, like, as you mentioned, was the water clean that they used to irrigate? What were the soils like? Were the people who harvested and processed the plants treated with respect and paid well? There's just no way of knowing if we don't know where they came from.
Yeah.
All right, so we want to ask, where do the herbs come from? And maybe follow up, because sometimes they give easy answers that aren't great. I had that same experience with there was a major company selling a lot of chaga stuff, and so I wrote the company to be like, express my concerns, and the first answer was like kind of this very, like, flowery language, and so then I asked again, like, I would love to see more proof, essentially, that these are being ethically wild harvested, and then the conversation ends. It's like, yeah, once you get into specifics, it's gone. So.
And to add more to that, so then the companies I work with, and so now at the Sustainable Herbs Initiative, when I realized that kind of people knew what needed to be done, it was more that they weren't doing it. And so now I'm working with companies in pre-competitive ways to tackle some of the challenges that they face. And these are companies, Gaia Herbs, Herb Farm, Mountain Rose, Banyan, Synergy, Traditional Medicinals, Asheville Tea Company, Evan Healy. They're companies that want to do the right thing, and it's super Pacific Botanicals. It's really challenging. Yogi Tea is another, but it's really challenging, and it's challenging because they compete on the shelf for companies that aren't investing in relationships with the farming communities where they source, or wild harvesting communities, and they will want to pay higher prices, but within their company they're getting pressure to not do that because of the whole, it's like the food, the food that we eat is so undervalued, and but it's the same thing with herbs. And so even when a company doesn't necessarily know where all their herbs are from, if they are working toward that and investing in relationships, like I think that because it's not all right and wrong, it's more about finding a relationship with a company, you respect their values, you believe they're doing what they can, and then like use your purchasing, like you make a donation to, your local public radio or something. It's a way to help them stay alive and do their work. And rather than just being like a consumer, we're very passive. But this is more kind of, okay, I believe in what you're trying to do. And how can, by being a customer, can I challenge you, keep asking questions, but can I also believe you, not believe you, but, support you? And all those companies also say the more questions that buyers of their products ask about where the herbs are from, are you certified? Some companies, people who work in sourcing, are being questioned now by CFO, their chief financial officers, around why do we need this Fair for Life certification, or do we really need certified organic? And the more customers are asking for those things, the more it helps those who are kind of trying to push back just this profit growth for the sake of growth mentality that is quite strong in the herb industry.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's one of those nuances out there of like, in some ways we have to be okay with imperfect as long as we're like, as consumers, being active and holding like accountability of improvement.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So like you're saying, like it's very difficult to be perfect in the systems that we have today, but we can be asking for increasing improvements along the way and appreciating the companies that are really trying to make this happen, and kind of appreciating them and their imperfection. But yeah, it's just both. Like it's not total acceptance, but it's also saying like, okay, you're trying, great, let's keep trying harder, and I'm going to support you along that process. I love that, like pretty much all of my favorite my like large herbal companies that are my favorites, you just mentioned them all as part of the Sustainable Herbs Initiative. So
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. All right. So where are we on questions? We've talked a lot about where is it from and the nuances and difficulties of knowing where it's from. Also, yeah, well, again, the difficulties and the imperfections within there. What else should we be asking about before we buy herbs?
I mean, I think the certified and the, if they know where it's from, I mean, vertical integration, like a lot of companies aren't vertically integrated. So, which means they don't buy all the herbs they don't grow, harvest, and process all of the herbs. And there are reasons for that. And a good question to ask is there an herbalist who is doing the formulation? That's a really important thing to ask. And
I feel like, just to be snarky a little bit, but it's oftentimes you can tell.
I know.
Like if you know a little bit about formulation, like you kind of look at it and you're like, oh, is this like a kitchen sink situation where they have like 1% of 1 gram of 50 herbs in the formula, or is there some nuance here? Anyway, that's just me being snarky. Continue, Anne.
and if it's marketing driven, and if there's a real Guido Masse who's quite involved in Sustainable Herbs Initiative and now works at Traditional Medicinals. He gave a fantastic presentation for Sustainable Herbs Initiative members around work they're trying to do around strategic formulation, and how he defines strategic formulation is, usually you would formulate, okay, thinking what action do I want, or what are the exciting herbs that I want to use. And what he is proposing and working to shift toward is, okay, they have these supplier communities, say supplier community in South India, that they have a really good relationship with. And as a way to help that supplier be more resilient, it would be better if, say, Traditional Medicinals or whomever would buy more than just one ingredient from them. And so if they brought 5, then that helps if there's a dip in one of the ingredients, and they buffer that with. And so how, by having that supplier say, okay, these are all the herbs we could provide you with. And right now, say a company's only buying 2, how could they formulate in a way that provides more support for the overall health of that farming community? Or, in this case, it would be a company that then had relationships with farming communities. And so I love the shift of attention. It goes back to what I was saying about ecological medicine. It's like we can only do well until if the planet is well. The health and resilience of this industry is only as healthy and resilient as the farming communities or the wild harvesting communities. And so how can formulation happen in a way that enhances that? So that's not really a question you can ask, but it is like who's doing the formulation, and then think about the factors that go into the decision-making process.
Well, I love that so much. Big fan of Guido as well. But that is really cool because it just makes me think of like we've become very entitled and spoiled in today's modern age where we just think that we have the right to use any herb that is possibly grown anywhere. And we choose, we can choose herbs based on just our number, our just desire. And that was never how herbalism was, right? Herbalism was always very bioregional, very local. And as herbalists, we often talk about how, within a given year, there's more of one herb than another herb. So like one year you just might have so much goldenrod everywhere. It's just a goldenrod year. It's a hawthorn year or whatever the case may be. And we are taught that you pay attention to the abundance that happens and the variance that happens within that because we're told that's what we'll need. If there's a lot of hawthorn out there, then granted, we probably are going to need a lot of hawthorn in our community that year. So we pay attention to those things. And there's just this natural rhythm that's that connection to the earth, connection to it all. So this is on a global scale. We aren't thinking bioregional anymore, but it is this more organic way of thinking. How can I follow the abundance instead of like somehow demand the abundance meets us and our desires? So that's really beautiful. I love that.
That's beautiful, the following the abundance. And it made me think of the first question that I should have said, do I need this herb? Do I need to buy this herb? And actually I use far fewer herbs now really than I did at the beginning of this when I was studying herbal medicine, because the journey, so I think I came to herbalism like many of us probably because it helped like something in my soul. It helped me be connected in a deeper way with myself and the planet through the plants. And by listening, just what you were saying, like by following, and by studying with someone like Rosemary, who really creates a space for listening to the direction that plants are taking each of us. I've gotten so much more healing than I would have from any product. And so that's the question then. So do I need to buy this herb, or is there another way I can be in relationship with it?
That's a wonderful first question. I think always, and that's, I've talked about this before on the podcast. One of my biggest herbal mistakes has been buying herbs that then went to waste because I didn't use them. And I went to school in Chinese medicine at Ayurveda and became so, we like in Chinese medicine school, we learned something like 300 or 400 plants. Like we had to memorize all those plants. And so I didn't want to just memorize them. I wanted to taste them and experience them. So I bought them and, and in some ways, like, I'm so glad that I had that experience, but in other ways, I'm like, that was a mistake. And I had to actually go through my basement apothecary a few years ago, and I threw away insane amounts of plants that were just like 10 years old because I'd bought them that one time and then didn't need them again. So I'm very like not proud to share that. It is embarrassing to me, but I feel like I have to share it because there's something to be said for like, oh, the smaller amounts is better. A smaller apothecary is better. Really focusing on the plants that you're really connected with and that you work with is so much better. I mean, I would say out of, my over 20 years of being an herbalist, that is one of the biggest, my biggest learnings and something that I don't know, becomes an asset. It's like, it's an asset to have an apothecary that is stocked with really fresh, vibrant herbs that you have a connection with and herbs that you really know how to work with well versus 100 herbs that are going stale and that you're kind of like, yeah, I think that might be good for coughs maybe. Right. So yeah. Do you need to buy this herb? First and foremost, great question. Yeah.
Yeah. Or they're a different way to be in relationship with it.
Mm.
I don't know if this totally follows, but so we led this learning journey in Appalachia in last October or September. And then we were planning to lead this one in November, but the group of people, we all wanted to get together again sooner. And so we gathered in Oregon in last June. It was 40 of us, and in Southwest Oregon. And we visited Oshala Farm and Banyan Farm and Herb Farm and Pacific Botanicals. And the second afternoon, I think we were at Herb Farm, and we did a drop dose with a tincture that was we didn't know what it was. The label was covered. And one person afterwards was like, I can't believe you all convinced me to take some, these aren't herbalists. These are people who work in the herb industry, take some tincture drop that I didn't know what it was. And so we went around and we all took a drop, and then we went and sat on our own somewhere on the farm. And then we came back and shared in a circle the experience of being with this plant. And as we started to go in that circle, I thought, the reason I began the work at the Sustainable Herbs Initiative after writing this book, Following the Herbal Harvest, was really to continue to see, okay, can I bring my intention and my whole self and the values I care about into this work in the industry, which it's a quite alienating world in many respects. And sitting in that circle, I realized I had listened to these plants and followed this journey, and that had created this circle where everybody was willing to not only take this drop dose and go off and lie and listen, come back and share the experience of listening to the plants. And I think that's like the bigger potency and power of and the invitation that they offer. And then the other part of that is after that, Kevin Casey from Banyan, who was in the circle, said, we all were changed by just taking a drop of a plant, and everything else should have changed after that. Like, we were changed by that plant, but we kind of just went back to business as usual. And I really listened to that and thought, he's right. What now? How do we really listen? And so this group just led another learning journey in Nicaragua, and this was 20 of us. And we were visiting, there is a company, Doselva, which was started by some man, Jefferson Shriver, who is American, but he's lived in Nicaragua for 20 years. And he is working with coffee farmers to diversify their farms and grow ginger and turmeric in an agroforestry setting. And Gaia Herbs was an early company that bought their ginger, and Yogi Tea also uses their ginger. And so we were visiting the farms and the processing center. And then the last day, our plan was to go to the forest and spend time with the plants in the forest, but there was a hurricane, so we had to stay inside, but in this room with a mural that was a forest, painted forest. And Guido was on the trip, and he led us on this visualization to grow our own forest, sort of the places that we had visited over the week. And then we passed around ginger and turmeric tea, and we each drank the tea and invited ginger and turmeric to lead us as we wrote questions responding to what does Gaia need right now that the natural products industry can offer? What does the natural products industry need right now that the Sustainable Herbs Initiative can offer? And what does the Sustainable Herbs Initiative need right now that I can offer? And so we each sat with ginger in the forest that we'd created and journaled, and then we shared in a circle from that. And then in the afternoon, we did a mapping exercise in 3 groups. And it's sort of mapping the current state with objects that we gathered, like rocks and stones and pens, and then looking at it from 4 directions and asking a series of questions like, what is being born? What is dying? What gives me energy? What does not? And then we moved those in a way that felt like it adjusted or shifted, helped right what was imbalanced. And then we talked about that, and then that is informing the work that we're doing now. And I, who knows how ginger and turmeric guided that, but it just feels like that comment that Kevin made about plants moved us, but we were moved, but we didn't change. And now just trying to see, okay, can we let them move a little more and change? Anyway.
And that's so beautiful. I'm just thinking, like, what a lovely thing that, like, as you said, these aren't necessarily herbalists who are participating in this. And these are kind of classic herbal things to do, but just the idea of like non-herbalists participating in it is really cool. And yeah, and having that, I mean, just a beautiful thing to even ask the plants for that guidance. So yeah. And um I don't know, how does that feel, Anne? That like you're, like this is like the Sustainable Herbs Initiative, like this is your baby, and this is coming. Obviously, it's this collaborative process between everybody, but I mean, what a powerful thing to have brought to the industry. Like you said, like you thought when you started writing the book that maybe there was somebody doing these things and there wasn't. And I mean, this is very like the words I think of right now in regards to you and the Sustainable Herbs Initiative are both groundbreaking and a bridge. I feel like kind of both of those things. Does that resonate with you?
Actually, it makes me want to cry. Because I care so deeply for the quality of relationships that are forming with the people who are participating, and we all feel that way. And so I'm so grateful. I think that, and I think not groundbreaking. It's like my own longing for connecting with people in a certain way. And so in Harangna, the village where I worked in Nepal, did research, when I was writing about how they planted rice, it was like looking for a place where the seedling would stand. Like the whole field isn't going to be a good place. You have to sort of find a place where you connect and resonate. And so I've been trying to find that. And I'm super grateful to be finding this circle, and the people who are coming each bring something that adds to what we're building together. And I think that's the plants. I mean, I do. I think that it's not.
Now I'm thinking about this web of relationships, which is where we first started talking about. I mean, you're talking about the power of relationships, both within the human collaborators with this project as well as the plants.
Yeah.
And I think that's where transformation happens.
Yeah.
So beautiful. I lost track of if we've asked 3 questions or we can just let that go. This has been such a beautiful conversation. So I think there's questions in there. There's one thing that I would like to bring up from the book that was really impactful for me. And you kind of talked about this earlier, is that that we need, as herbalists and as people who care about the earth and ecological wellness, that we need to be careful that herbs are not the herbal products business, or what, however we want to talk about it, is not a simple extraction business. And one way that you talk about that in the book is that there are herbal companies that are not simply doing the minimum to pay the workers or whatever, but they're actually giving back to the community. And I'm wondering if you would speak to that or maybe give an example of that. But that's something that, I don't know, that was really eye-opening to me and really beautiful to me reading that in the book.
Well, I can answer it by talking more about something from the learning journey.
Please. Yeah.
In Oregon, Matt Richards, who's from Organic Herb Trading Company, which is a really good UK company that they're not a finished product company. They buy and sell herbs for brands. But he was talking about how different it was to be visiting farmers or thinking about connecting with them and not just in compliance, looking for compliance, because that's usually what he's doing when he goes to visit suppliers. Side note, another good question to ask companies is, in addition to do you know where your herbs are from? Do you visit your suppliers? Because, and that relates to the point I'm going to make. So Matt commented on that, but still, like the farm visit we had, we met with migrant farm workers at Oshala, but it was still very much us as outsiders asking questions in a kind of extractive way. And so when we were planning the learning journey in Nicaragua, we talked a lot about, okay, how can we have a conversation with these farmers that's not just us as the, outsiders coming in, tell us your story. And so we thought a lot about how to structure that. And Jefferson and his team at DoSelva did a lot of really important preparatory work around talking to the farmers around, okay, how could we do some work or do some way to connect with them as individuals and people rather than just coming in to see, oh, where's your turmeric and how's it growing? And even when I was in a small group, so we're in small groups of 3 or 4 people going to visit different farmers. And we were in our truck, and the Nicaraguan who worked with DoSelva, and we were talking about, oh, how can we do this in a way that isn't extractive? And he said, well, just be yourselves, and like you have the intention to connect, and so that will inform how you connect. And it really did, and there was a quality of the interaction in each of the different 3 farmer visits that was unlike any supplier visit I've been on before, which is very much, even companies that are trying and giving back and all of that, they still have to meet certain quality, the guidelines and check the boxes and things like that. But I think what I'm trying to say is that what we realized is it's not just the actions that are done, it's how we interact and do the actions and interact with the people. It's that same relationship of reciprocity that we were talking about with the plants. And Matt Richards from Organic Herb Trading Company, who was in Nicaragua as well, he said, he was pretty skeptical when he heard we were talking about working to help on the farms with the farmers. He said he'd done that on plenty of supplier visits and it felt very performative and for marketing, but that his experience of it was that it was totally different. And he was going to take that back and use those as guidelines for how they do supplier visits moving forward. And so I think there's kind of I'm getting back to your question, 2 levels to that. It's the quality of how that interaction happens. It's not just I'm coming in with an idea of a project. Mm-hmm. Even when it's a giving, it's an extracting, right? And so how that can emerge from this other quality. I mean, it was interesting. The first farmer we visited, he had all the things that he grew on his land on a table to show us, and he showed them to us, and then he handed us baskets to go harvest coffee, which we did for like half an hour, and we were very bad at it. And then he was showing us other things and talking, and we didn't. And only when I went up the hill to just look around and I saw the turmeric and I came back down and I said, oh, can we go see the turmeric? Usually you would have first gone to see the turmeric and only focused on the turmeric and not the farmer as a farmer who had a whole table filled with different products from his land. I don't know if that, and someone once who worked at Pucka, a tea company in the UK, talked about how he realized every time they visited farmers in Turkey where they bought fennel, they would only ask about the fennel. But these were farmers who grew a whole bunch of different things, who had whole other lives. Mm-hmm. And so it's just this shift of seeing the product, the raw material, to seeing the person in the context of their lives.
Yeah, there's an openness there. There's a difference between showing up with a clipboard with expectations and going down them in a linear manner to being more of an open experience where you're there to accept what's presented in a way, not just your own initiative or lens.
And what you need. Another way of putting it, there's a woman in Nepal, Sultana. She and her husband have they buy ginger from farmers in Western Nepal, and they have a processing facility. And she runs a processing facility. And she said every day when the women would come to work, around 60 women work there, she would look at their faces to see how they were doing. And she would ask them, are you happy? Are you worried? And she said in the moment when they were coming in, they'd always say, oh, they're fine. But she said she could tell. And the women who didn't look, if they looked worried or anxious, she would go to their homes at night just to talk to them and find out more about what was happening in their lives. And and then they would open up more and share about, pressures with their husbands or their parents. And I asked her why that mattered. And she said, because she's a businesswoman, and she said, if I need to, like, as a businesswoman, she cared about their overall wellness and how they were, not just how they performed the job. I mean, it's integrally connected. If they're not feeling well, if they're stressed, they're not going to do the job as well. But it just feels like this important shift of seeing a person as a person, not as a worker in your factory, or not like the fennel, not as a commodity for your company. I don't know. I don't know if I'm making that point, but
Yeah. It's all of this is just really beautiful, and just a really, I don't know, again, just thinking like standing at the supplement aisle at the health food store, there's so many hidden stories behind those bottles. And you've brought up so many things today that even after reading the book, you're making me think about things to think about and consider. And yeah, really powerful things. The book, again, is so amazing. It's, travel log, it's a page turner. And yeah, there's just such beautiful stories in there. And I think it's such a really big eye opener in what people need to be thinking about in terms of with herbs. And again, it's just not simple. It's really not simple, but it's really important. And you've also, so everyone, I'm just saying outright, everyone needs to buy this book and read it, and then tell me what you think, because I love to hear back from folks. And then you have the Sustainable Herbs Initiative. It sounds like that's kind of like for the product industry. Is there ways that we as people who love and buy herbs can support the work you're doing there?
sure, you can take
Yeah.
donations.
Lovely.
So it was under the American Botanical Council, and last year I took it away, and it's under the Sustainable Food Lab, because their work kind of resonates a little more with the direction I've been going with companies. But the idea so I've been focusing on strengthening and deepening the connections with these companies. But part of what we're really trying to do is how to share these stories in ways to those who buy herbs, like how to tell the story in an authentic way of the work that companies are trying to do, so that it's not marketing, that it's connected around and nourishing. And so those will be stories that we'll begin to share more soon. And
what if you had like a host of, like, just say maybe like a podcast show, and they went with you and Guido to these cool places, and then help to tell the stories? Just like, I'm asking just like for a friend who might fit that description.
sure, follow up.
I'm just trying to get the invite.
Come, yeah. Actually, we're planning. So we had that in Oregon in June, and then we're planning just a reunion in June again in Oregon. So we could talk.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
And I know your website is in the process of being, maybe the URL is going to change, so we're going to get that before this episode airs. So we can't say it here on air, but you can look in the show notes to get a link to Ann's work, and you can subscribe to her newsletter so you get updates on what cool things that she's working on. So definitely do that as well.
Yeah, and the website will be the same, sustainableherbsinitiative.org. I just need to update it, the website.
Oh, I see. The website itself is changing, but the
Yeah.
URL is there. Will you say that one more time?
The website link?
Yes.
sustainableherbsinitiative.org.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification. It'll also be in the show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we move on to the last question?
No.
All right. And the last question I have for you is this. You've been working with plants for over 30 years. You took your first herb class with Rosemary in the 90s. You've had some really interesting ways of being in the herbal world, from documentaries to this incredible book, and now your Sustainable Herbs Initiative. And my question for you is, why do you keep doing what you're doing? What keeps propelling you forward?
Yeah, a while ago, right after I was sharing Newman when I was doing this grassroots activity, trying to get the film screened in places. And I was working on blog posts, and it would take me forever to, I'm sure you did this too in the early days, just to get the post up there. And friends of mine were like, why are you so focused on this? And then, then I was working on this book, and like kind of like a dog with a bone. I keep staying with this project and how it's changing. And last year I was doing a short writing workshop with John Hostofer, who was around. He was one of the co-authors of that kinship series that Robin Kimmerer, they did 5 books, and he was talking about being a good ancestor. And he read this passage, and I want to read the passage, and then he sent us off to do a writing exercise. And I just want to read this quotation. He says, "The kind of ancestor you want to be is measured by the land. It's not measured by whether or not your great-grandkid remembers you. It's measured by whether or not you set in motion a system of values, whether or not you set in motion communities that allow for people of the future to still have wild rice in their stomach during the wild rice moon in September." And so what he was talking about, that, like the wild rice, he had told a story that meant that ecological and cultural community was intact because the wild rice was there. And so he sent us off to, like, okay, for you, what does it mean to be a good ancestor? And as I was writing about these plants and why do I keep following these plants? And I was I'm from West Virginia, and I was in a forest in Appalachia in the writing, and felt that kind of heart pain when you love someplace so deeply. And I realized that the work that I'm doing, for me, black cohosh is a strong plant because, or the work I'm trying to do is to try and make it be that when black cohosh is harvested, it is done in a way that's helping that forest and the cultural framework of that Appalachian forest to be intact. It's somehow part of this, I guess, this hope that maybe so many of us have for, like, healing our relationship with the planet. And so to me, this is a pathway where I feel like it's getting there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful quote and writing and experience that you shared. That kinship series is very good, by the way. I have that, and I love it. Well, thank you for sharing that. This has been such a beautiful conversation. I didn't see all the different little trails that we were going to go down today, and it's been really wonderful. So thanks again so much for being here. Thank you for your amazing work. Thank you for holding on and being that, the dog with a bone, and keep following that trail. It's been really important work that's just been a really big gift to the herbal community.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And for your thoughtful questions and interesting conversation.
My pleasure, Ann. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to head over to the show notes at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com to download a free chapter of Ann's book, and you can also find a transcript of this show. There you'll also be able to sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is the best way to stay in touch with me. You can find more about Ann and the Sustainable Herbs Initiative by checking out their website at sustainableherbsinitiative.org. If you'd like more herbal episodes to come your way, then one of the best ways to support this podcast is by subscribing on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. I deeply believe that this world needs more herbalists and plant-centered folks, and I'm so glad that you're here as part of this herbal community. Also, a big round of thanks to the people all over the world who make this podcast happen week to week. Emily Thomas Anderson is the project manager who oversees the entire podcast operation, from guest outreach to writing show notes and on and on. I often tell people, I just show up. Emily does most of the heavy lifting. Nicole Paul is the operator for the entire Herbs with Rosalee school and community. She keeps an eagle-eye view on everything to ensure it's running smoothly. Francesca is our fabulous video and audio editor. She not only makes listening more pleasant, she also adds beauty to the YouTube videos with plant images and video overlays. Tatiana Rusakova is the botanical illustrator who creates gorgeous plant and recipe illustrations for us. I love them, and I know you love them. Once the illustration is ready, Jenny creates the recipe cards as well as the thumbnail images for YouTube. Alex is our behind-the-scenes tech support and social media manager, and Karen and Emily are our student services coordinators and community support. If you've written in with a question, undoubtedly you got help from them. For those of you who like to read along, Jennifer is who creates the transcripts each week. Xavier, my handsome French husband, is the cameraman and website IT guy. It takes an herbal village to make it all happen, including you. Thank you so much for your support through your comments, reviews, and ratings. One of my very favorite things about this podcast is hearing from you. I read every comment that comes in, and I'm excited to hear your herbal thoughts about buying medicinal plants. Okay, you've lasted to the very end of the show, which means you get a gold star and this herbal tidbit. Well, Anne recently published a thought-provoking article on her Substack about the sustainability of black cohosh. I just finished reading it, and my biggest takeaway is just how complex this issue truly is, and how grateful I am for people like Anne who dedicate their time to researching and critically exploring these topics. It really does take a village, and Anne's a shining example of someone showing up and playing her part. I'll include a link to that article in the show notes, and I highly recommend giving it a read, especially if you work with black cohosh. And while we're on the topic, I'll say it once again, her book, Following the Herbal Harvest, is a must-read for anybody who loves medicinal plants.